Good afternoon, and thanks very much for the possibility to be here to speak. My name is Fredrik Norlund, coming from Sweden, where I work at the Ministry of Infrastructure at the Energy Department, mostly with electricity market issues and policy around that. The topic of my presentation today is adequacy mechanisms from a policy perspective. I will give you sort of an overview of the Swedish situation, not going in so much details, so it's more on a general level. And I think that even though, of course, Sweden is much a smaller country than Brazil, there are still some similarities, like both countries have very much hydropower, and also to some extent there's a lot of electricity production in the north, while the load centers are located in the south. So just to first put Sweden on the map, if you have forgotten, it's a quite small country when it comes to inhabitants, located in the north of Europe, in Scandinavia, just 10 million people, but the size is quite big compared to other European countries. At least it's actually bigger than Germany and the UK, but just 5% of the size of Brazil. And also most of the population lives down south in the country. Now I see it's a mistake there. The capital is not Sweden, the capital is Stockholm. It's a constitutional monarchy, and we also have been a member of the European Union since the middle of the 90s. Then turning into the electricity market, about our energy mix. The electricity system was developed about 100 years ago around hydropower, and that most of that hydropower was located in the north of the country, and the people live in the south, so that has resulted also in a quite strong transmission grid in the north-south direction. And then in the 70s and 80s, we built nuclear power in the, and then those production facilities were located closer to the load centers in the south. As you can see there on the picture to the left, that's the energy mix from the 90s and to nowadays, and in the bottom, the blue, that's hydropower, so it's quite a lot important production, and then on top of that it's nuclear, so that's the main production in Sweden. And then the latest years on top, you see also that wind power has increased. And on the picture to the right, that's a typical day, how it can look like from the morning to the evening. And as you see, the nuclear power is like a base. Then there is wind power, and that can vary quite a lot between the days. And then you have the hydropower following the load. And at the moment, and in the recent years, we have had a quite strong energy balance. We are exporting electricity. Seems to be a kind of all-time high when it comes to exports, around 25 terawatt hours. And then just a few more words on hydro. We can say that earlier, when we were much more dependent than on hydropower when it comes to adequacy, the challenge back then was to cover the load during dry years, and as you can see here on the right, the average production from our hydro is around 65 terawatt hours, But then you see depending on the inflow, it can vary quite a lot. Yeah, and these variations, they are of course still important for us when it comes to security of supply, especially on energy. But since after we got the nuclear power installed, it's not that critical anymore when it comes to capacity. Instead, these variations, they are affecting more the electricity prices at the moment. So one example here, we deregulated our market in 1996, and now it's difficult to see on the graph, but there were quite many years in a row around 96 with high inflow, which led to very low electricity prices during summertime. And then that was kind of a general understanding in our country that summertimes we have low electricity prices. But then there were 2 years leading to very high prices during the summer, which came as a kind of a surprise. But this is how we have learned to adapt to this market. This is how it works. But this led at that time to very much discussions also on the political level, if we can really rely on this market model. No, I cannot. Here. I think it got stuck here. Now here. Okay, so moving on to a bit about our policy then on generation. In 1996, when the market was deregulated, generation adequacy was secured by regulated cooperation between large power companies. And to be part of this cooperation and part of the market, they have to meet certain requirements, both when it comes to energy and capacity. And there were targets for security of supply. For example, when it comes to capacity, the risk for capacity shortage shouldn't be higher than 3%, meaning the risk should be maximum 9 hours per year. And when it comes to energy, the risk for energy shortage should not be more than 0.1%, meaning once every 30 years. But this system, together with the lack of competition, led to overinvestments in production, and which created high costs for consumers and industry. And actually the security of supply was quite much higher than these targets. So that was one objective of our market reform, to move away from this trend. So then in 96 we had this deregulation, and one part of it was that we unbundled the production from the distribution and transmission. And another part was that we introduced this energy-only market together with our electricity neighbors in the Nordic countries. And you probably, all of you know what the energy-only market is, but it means that the producers only get paid for what they sell to consumers, not for having capacity beside the market. So the idea was back then that the price signals in the different markets should signal lack of capacity and drive investments if needed. To the right, there is it's a picture of the different market places that we have. I think tomorrow will be separate discussion, but very briefly. Supply meets demand and sets a price. And then after that, during the day, the market participants can adjust their commitments in the intraday market, which is mostly, in our case anyway, continuous trading. And after that, in the operating hour, the TSO is responsible for keeping the frequency in balance within certain limits, and is responsible for the regulating market, where also the market participants can offer their bids for up and downward regulation. And apart from that physical market, there is also a financial market where the market participants can hedge their positions. Another thing that is a bit is linked to also to security of supply and adequacy is the bidding zones that we have in Sweden. We have 4 of them inside our country. It's not so common in Europe yet. I think it's just Sweden and Denmark in the EU, and then Norway as well, if I'm not wrong. Basically, instead of having just one price for the entire country, we have 4 different wholesale prices. And since the southern part of the country have scarcity of production, many times you see higher prices in the south compared to the north. So that creates production. Also our TSO, since we have an energy flow from the north to the south, creating losses, our TSO have a tariff system that is geographically differentiated. So that means that the energy part of the tariff you get actually paid if you have production in the south, and you have to pay in the north. So it also contributes to these incentives to place new production in the south of the country where we have a scarcity situation. Yes, I think that's it. Moving on here, then coming to the balance responsibility, this is something that is very central in these aspects and central part of our market design. This figure is very simplified, showing the market model that we have. To the left you have the financial side, and on the right the physical side. If we go through that really fast, you see to the left then the producers and the suppliers meet at the power exchange on these different markets. And then the suppliers, they sell the electricity then to the consumers and industry. And then on the right side you have the physical distribution of the electricity to the consumers. And what we have in the law is this balance responsibility for the suppliers, meaning that they are required to sell the amount of energy that their consumers are consuming, so to say. And this balance responsibility they can keep for themselves, or they can let another party do this or have that responsibility for them, so to say. So what happens if the system is unbalanced and the TSO is balancing this through the balancing market, the suppliers causing this problem have to pay afterwards. So it's for the settlement. So that means that in fact they have kind of a financial commitment to keep their balance, and that's an important issue. This is one important part of adequacy. So about in our country then, when it comes to power and adequacy issues, it's actually the winter time. We have quite cold winters that it could be the challenge, or is. As I said, it is actually the power balance in the south which is we have nuclear power plants that are getting quite old. They were built in the 70s and 80s, and they are now, the oldest ones are being decommissioned. And the power company Vattenfall, they decided in 2015 to close, you see the Ringhals 1 and 2 this year and the next year. So, and all of these nuclear power plants, as I said from the beginning, are located in the southern part of the country. So this is what we are keeping an eye on now, this development. And it's important also to say that this decommissioning of power of nuclear, it's not a political decision. It's driven by the market actually, and that these power plants are getting old, so they are unprofitable, so to say. The government is, of course, in 2016 an agreement, a political agreement on a long-term energy policy between the government and also 3 other parties in the parliament. And then they decided in the long term until 2040 that we should have 100% renewable electricity production. And they also agreed on that at the moment they are not considering changing anything around the market model in these aspects. So when it comes to measures then for generation adequacy, as I said from the beginning, the starting point is the market. we tried, that's the first ambition, to establish a balance with the ordinary market. Then we have other tools, like we have the bidding zones and differentiated tariffs creating incentives. But also we have a strategic reserve, which is a peak load reserve since 2003. This is a reserve that our TSO is procuring for the winter times. It's available between November and March each year, and it consists both of production and flexible consumption. But the aim and the objective that we have had is to phase out this strategic reserve in the long run, that the market should take care of generation adequacy itself. So the volume has been decreasing, as you can see in the table there. So now we are down at 750 megawatts in this reserve. So looking at the figure on top, there you see the different steps, so to say, when it comes to adequacy. We first have a day-ahead market then, and if we are not reaching equilibrium, that supply can meet demand, and we have a price cross there in the day-ahead market, you can activate the strategic reserve. We have an intraday market and a regulating market, where also if there are not enough bids in the regulating market, you can also activate this reserve. On top of that, we have active disturbance reserve that in certain circumstances could be used. And then on top, of course, you can always apply load shedding, and that's something we want to avoid, but it's possible. But that has never been the case yet in our country. Yeah. Then we, as you know, we are we are a member of the European Union, so we have to also fulfill all the legislation from the EU. And now, very recently, there has been a package adopted, the Clean Energy Package, which contains some aspects regarding capacity mechanisms and adequacy. And I just go through some examples here. On a general level, first, each member state has to make an assessment regarding their adequacy situation according to a European methodology. It can also be supplemented with national assessment. And the rule is that if none of these two can show that you have an adequacy problem, then you're not allowed to have a capacity mechanism. It's quite clear also in this legislation that capacity mechanisms is supposed to be a last resort solution. You should first try to fix the ordinary market to make that function. I think perhaps Andres will talk a bit more about this later. Then also, if you have a capacity mechanism like we have, then you should also have a national reliability standard saying what level of security of supply you can accept. And also, if in your assessments find that you have problems, you should adopt an implementation plan how to improve your market function.
Também. Não?
And when activated, the imbalances are to be settled at least at the value of lost load, so it will be very expensive And there is also an emission performance standard, meaning that you cannot have, there's a threshold on CO2 emissions on the production. I think, for example, coal-fired plants will not be able to have any more up to a certain time. On all levels, I would say, in the society. But at least one thing that we can see now in the times of digitalization, there is a great potential, we think, on demand response solutions, both for consumers to save and earn money, but also to cut these peaks, demand peaks.
Eu vou parar